everybody. Welcome back to another episode of God Built This Podcast. I'm your host, Maxine, and we're on episode 199. Dahmer. I mean, if you have been living under a rock the past few days, you'll know, or you wouldn't know, that Dahmer is just a hot word right now. So I'm saying Dahmer because that is the last name of Jeffrey Dahmer, who is, or was, he's no longer with us here on earth. He was a serial killer who took the lives of 17 men and boys during the early 90s in Milwaukee. So in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right? Yeah. So this Netflix documentary, I haven't finished it yet. At this point of my voice, I have watched episode 1, 2, and 3. And I felt like I needed to take a smoke break at the end of every episode. And I don't even smoke. But this series, man, like, and you know, with me, I like to understand someone's psychology. I just like to understand human behavior. And understanding humans' behavior doesn't mean to agree with said behavior, right? Like, obviously, I don't agree nor condone what he did throughout those years, and to all of the victims and to the survivor, actually, because in the first episode of the series, it's such a slow burn, especially being that I already knew of Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, I was already familiar of him and his crimes and just the impact that they had, but I guess I didn't really understand it in full detail. And since the premiere of this series, I've been noticing a lot of tweets on Twitter about it. And people were saying, people who lived in Milwaukee at that time remember the hysteria that was happening during that time. And they also said that there was a smell in the air, like things just didn't smell right. And as you know, when you have a rotting body or bodies, there's a smell that comes with that, just like with any rotting animal. And maybe, so I'm thinking that's what they mean by smell, but there was just a smell in the air that just was unappetizing, or just, you know, displeasing at the very least. So the series starts off such a slow burn, and I felt like I was on pins and needles throughout just the first episode. And okay, spoiler alert, I'm gonna spoil it, okay? Again, I only watched episodes 1, 2, and 3 at the time of this recording, so sorry, but I'll try my best to not say too much. But I mean, it's a known case, right? Like, you can go on Google and figure out what happened. So in episode 1, the person that he picked up, now a majority of his victims, I want to say actually not all, but a majority of his victims were black boys and black men. Okay, when I say boys, I mean under the age of 18. And when I say men, I mean probably in their early 20s. So they were his predominant demographic. But in the latest episode that I watched, I believe, episode 3, we see that he killed a white man. And actually, he was his first victim. So he started off white. Y'all know I gotta find a joke. He started off white and then bled into focusing more on black boys and men. Unfortunately, I mean, regardless of who he's killing, it's just all disturbing and just devastating. But you know, there's so many ways to go with this topic. You know, it's not only about, of course it's about Dahmer, right? He's the main topic. He's the one who did all these heinous crimes. And, you know, I'm glad that he was finally caught, even though it could have been it could have been caught sooner. Like he could have been taken away much earlier prior to him becoming a serial anything. The first victim that he caught, there was a close scene in episode 3 where he could have finally got caught by the cops, but I don't know if it's a mix of white privilege, but I think it's more so about him looking like a young kid, and he was pulling the excuse of, in that scene that I'm referencing, his parents being divorced. So he knew what he was doing to gain sympathy, and for that reason, the cop decided to just let him go. Like, you know what, just turn your ass around and go back home, because the cop ended up pulling him over because he was drinking, or he was swerving while he was driving, which clearly indicates that he was intoxicated. And instead of ensuring that this intoxicated driver is off the road, the police officer decided to say, just turn back around and drive your ass back home. Like, you couldn't have gotten into an accident and going back home. Like, it's just. And then while I was watching this show, just the first 3 episodes, I'm really understanding how just times were different. Like, things culturally were so different back then than they are now. So you also have to look at things from that context. Growing up in the 70s, in the late 60s, there was this free range style of parenting. And what I mean by that is many parents during that time weren't really present with their children, whether that's physically, emotionally, mentally, etc. They weren't present with their children. And you have the result of that in kids just doing whatever they want, staying out, getting into drugs, getting into alcohol, not going to school. And you also have a school system that didn't really do their job. Like, and all the times when, there's a specific scene in which Dahmer goes to school and he goes into class late. The teacher calls him out like, oh, you're late. And he just sits down in his chair. And while he sits down, he takes out a pack of beer, a 6-pack, okay? And he takes one beer out and opens it and just drinks it in class. I'm sorry, what? So you see the teacher calling him out. Are you drinking beer? He asked him. So he asked him that question. The next scene comes in and you just see Dahmer with, it looks like it was the college career counselor. But there was no moment in time when he got in trouble for bringing in alcohol to school. There was no point in time when, I know there was a scene when the college counselor said she tried phoning his mom and his dad, but they couldn't reach either one of them. But the point is, like, why is that just enough for you? You couldn't reach the parents, and so you just think it's okay to have a child come on school grounds with alcohol? Like, that is spreading drugs. Like, you're essentially allowing and okaying the spread of drugs. But I think maybe because at that time he was a senior student, maybe there was some leeway there. But either way, like, the school failed him too. Like, just the whole fucking society failed this nigga. Now, again, it does not excuse, obviously, his behavior. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying just the insight of how he grew up and the context in which he grew up in makes you really aware of how one could possibly become who he became. Now, of course, there are plenty of people who grew up in that time and had similar experiences, right? Maybe you didn't have a present parent. Maybe you had to raise yourself and you turned out to be a good standing citizen. That's great. Good for you. But some people aren't like that. Like, there are people who still struggle with whatever took place in their lives when they were 6, when they were 7, and they stay with that mindset. And I don't know what happens to, like, what are the differences between someone who grew up in a rough upbringing compared to someone who grew up in a rough upbringing yet still did something just honorable in their lives, while the other person grew up in a rough upbringing and decided to be a victim of their circumstances, right? So, what are the differences between those two types of people? Is it a nature versus nurture thing? Is it finally an adoption of realizing that, hey, I'm in charge of my life and I want more for myself, right? Maybe you finally increase your self confidence, and despite how life gave you lemons, you decided to make lemonade. I don't know. Like, I really don't know how some people turn out for the better and some people turn out for the worse. I think it's just really about understanding that, we have free will, yet some people don't think that they do have control over their lives or their thoughts or their feelings. And okay, so going into that. So now he's growing up in the 60s, in the 70s, and he's realizing that he's a gay homosexual. Like, he's a homosexual. He's a full-blown, I like dick type of nigga, okay? He wants men and only men. There's a particular scene when he is trying to masturbate while looking at nude female photos in a magazine. And he's flipping through the pages, hoping that he finds something that just gets him going. And he's already rubbing himself, right? He's already stroking his dick, but his dick is not hard, right? It's not getting hard. He's not into it, and it's just not a successful masturbation session. So now he then decides to throws the magazine onto the floor, and now he's using his thoughts. And the thought that he uses is not necessarily an instance of him being in a homosexual activity. He actually thinks of a time when he was dissecting a dead animal and playing with the organs in his hands. So while he was thinking about that moment in time of playing with a dead animal's organs in his hands, he jacked off, and jacked off successfully. Like, okay, nigga, what the hell went wrong with you? Like, how does one turn out that way, right? I don't know. Like, sometimes people just steer the whole wrong turn, right? The whole wrong way. And this is the circumstance of that. I just, I was so, literally my mouth was agape, okay? I was sitting there watching that scene like, he is really turned on by him holding a dead animal's heart. So you see that moment. So there's plenty of times his victims, not only did he rape, torture and abuse and eventually killed his victims, but he what's the proper term for it? But he basically he chopped them up. He chopped them up piece by piece. Like, he chopped off their heads, their limbs. He even saved a head in his refrigerator. He saved different parts of the body of some of his victims in his home. He puts it in this big container. And this really comes from him being a child and realizing his joy in dissecting things. So when he was younger, he and his father used to pick up roadkill, like literal roadkill off the road. They would pick up roadkill, put it in the car, and then they would go to this backyard shed in their home, and they would just dissect the damn thing. And they would talk about the different parts of that animal's body. So, for example, they were dissecting an opossum, and the father, clearly he's more well-versed at that time to dissecting animals. And he was teaching his son about dissecting animals and all of that. And so you see, mind you, Dahmer at this time, he's a young kid, probably 10 years old. And he's really happy about this moment and really excited about it and really just really into it. And, I look, it may feel weird, right? Like, okay, ew, you just dissected animals. But, someone has to dissect animals, right? Like, it's not necessarily a weird thing. Like, I wouldn't immediately think to myself, oh, this kid's gonna become a murderer. I know that's the typical stereotype, though, and clearly this is fitting for Dahmer. But, I know people say, oh, well, you gotta watch out for the kid who would torture animals and dissect. But it's not really about the dissecting part, because when they talk about like murderers, they really say, oh, he started off by killing animals. Not once in his childhood did they show, at least so far from what I've watched, not once did they show Dahmer killing animals. He never killed an animal. He just took animals that were already dead. There's a difference. And decided to dissect them with his dad. And his dad didn't kill animals either. They just did it together. So in my head, I'm thinking like, well, this could have been a gateway towards him becoming a veterinarian, right? Like, this could have been a gateway of him becoming a doctor. Like, it doesn't have to always mean he would have turned out to become a serial killer. I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt, even though obviously he turned out to be a serial killer. But okay, so anyway, so Dahmer, so he grew up in a home in which he had to witness his mother experience just these like weird mental episodes. There was one scene in particular, he didn't experience it firsthand, but we experienced it as the viewer, right? So we see Dahmer's mother pregnant with Dahmer, and she is first sitting in her home and just rubbing her belly. And in the next scene, we see her at the bus stop, barefooted. It's cold. It's snowing, actually. And she's just like in a daze. And her husband, Jeffrey Dahmer's father, he notices her as he's driving. And so he pulls over and guides her into their car. But this is just one of many moments in which the dad witnesses his wife just go through these mental breakdowns. So initially I'm thinking like, okay, there's some type of mental illness, maybe she's schizo. Yeah, I was thinking more so like schizo, just kind of, just having these experiences of just strange moments. Later on, we find out that she was postpartum. And I never realized that postpartum can make you react that way. I'm sure every woman deals with it differently. I'm thinking about a memory. A memory just came up in my mind, actually, of a time years ago. This lady who I went to church with, well, she was a member of the church that I went to back home in Boston, my childhood church. And she would have these just mental breakdowns. And it happened particularly after her having her first child, her giving birth to her first child. And there was just a widespread prayer call service for her because she was missing. She just ended up missing. She left her home with her husband. She was married. I believe she probably still is, but she was married, and she decided to leave her house and didn't tell her husband where she was going, and she hasn't returned yet. And she was just wandering around and just talking out loud to herself, screaming and yelling, just like going through these like very creepy moments. Actually, I remember there was a couple of times at church when she would arrive to church and she would just be in a daze, and her body will convulse. And of course, if you look at it from a spiritual eye, you'll see her as someone experiencing with demons and being possessed by demons. And so I remember times when that happened, you had deacons and deaconesses surrounding her, praying over her, speaking life over her, holding the Bible over her to get rid of whatever demon was trying to hold hostage and hold her as host. So that could have been an expression of postpartum, which is, I just, in my mind, I would just thought postpartum was just, oh, some depression, right? You brought in a life and maybe you're not connected to that child and, whatever, right? And maybe you feel guilty for it. But actually, I'm just looking it up right now. There's postpartum depression and then there's postpartum psychosis. So let's look at that. So postpartum psychosis is a severe mental illness that can affect a woman after she has a baby. Most women with postpartum psychosis will experience psychosis, and which is basically a psychotic episode, and other symptoms very soon after giving birth, usually within the first 2 weeks. Psychosis causes people to perceive or interpret things differently from those around them. The two main symptoms are hallucinations and hold on, let me click the link. So hallucinations, as well as delusions, a manic mood, a low mood. Yeah, all of these things. So Dahmer's mother was finally diagnosed as, it was after the fact, actually. It was much later, of course. But it was clear that she was dealing with postpartum. They didn't say psychosis, they just says postpartum. But after reading psychosis, it definitely had to have been postpartum psychosis. And, it just makes me wonder, what about giving birth to a child makes you experience such a psychotic break? Like, that is terrifying. And I wonder if it has to do with any medication that you may have been on. But there was a point in, I believe it was episode 1, 2, or 3. But Dahmer's mom, she was taking pills, and her husband was saying that she should stop taking these pills. They're not helping. They're hurting. And she would take some pills for her anxiety, and then she would take other pills for, I don't know what specifically were the other pills for, but I remember him saying another pill was for anxiety. So I'm wondering, with the combination of several different pills, did it possibly trigger or cause, some way for her to then experience postpartum? Mind you, she's taking these pills while she's pregnant. She has not given birth yet. And postpartum psychosis, postpartum depression happens after you give birth, right? So I do wonder if there's a correlation here. So I wonder, had she not taken any pills, if she was not on any medication, would she then have experienced postpartum depression or psychosis? And she was saying also that while she was pregnant, she did not feel excited, or she didn't long for her child. It's a plethora of things, right? Like, so like this series really gets down into the nitty gritty. So like, I knew of Dahmer, right? I knew the crimes he committed, but I didn't know in full detail how he grew up. And of course, I'm not saying this as a way to excuse his behavior, but I didn't know his context. I didn't know it in detail, at least. I didn't know about his mother being just mentally deranged. I didn't know about the divorce that he had to experience and the absence of both parents. There was a scene in which he goes home from school, and he witnesses his mother rushes outside to the car with his younger brother, and she's carrying briefcases, suitcases, just bags, and it's clear that she's going on a trip with her youngest son. And Dahmer's like, where are you going? Like, are you still my mom? Like, what's going on? And she's saying she's gonna go on a trip. She needs to clear her mind. She needs to leave the home. And he's like, I can't go with you. I have graduation. I have prom. I'll be, graduating high school soon. And she's like, and she starts to laugh. She laughs at her son. And she says, you're not coming with me. She says, you're not coming with me. She basically also say that she doesn't have a close relationship with him, and for many years you will always laugh with your father about my lunatic, about how I'm a lunatic. Because there's been times, but like the son, Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't laughing. He was just witnessing things. But I think, I don't know, I guess her seeing her son witness her in these frantic moments made her feel like he was judging her. So she looped her son with how her husband showed his disdain towards her, because there was many scenes in which her husband was looking down on her and obviously not understanding her psychotic breakdowns. He was just annoyed with the fact that he's married to a woman who can't hold it together. And that just comes from a place of ignorance, of course, right? And look, I don't think anyone's necessarily in the wrong in this circumstance. You just have someone, but it's hard to be with someone who's mentally ill, right? Like, and that's not, like, I think you have to have these real conversations in saying that, like, not everyone is understanding, unfortunately, or sensitive to mental illnesses, to mental disorders, to personality disorders. Some people don't get that shit. And even if you do get it, some people don't want to even fucking deal with that shit. Like, what the fuck you mean you got a mental breakdown? Like, why are you laying in bed again? Like, we got to go to work, or, you got to get up, you got to clean the kitchen, you got to do this, you got to do that, and you're still in bed? Right? And that's just what it is. Like, some people don't know how to deal with that, and they don't want to deal with that. And I think that's your fucking right? Like, look, and I'm saying this also insensitivity to her. It doesn't sound like I'm sensitive, right? No, but I'm also recognizing that it's not easy to deal with someone who's mentally ill. It's really not. And it takes a lot of patience, understanding, education, right? Just knowledge in general of someone with a mental illness. It's really difficult, because you may think, well, I got up and go to work. I got up, I brush my teeth, I shower, I get going with my day. Why is it so hard for you to do the same? Like, why can't you just fucking get up? You're a mother now. You're a mother, right? Like, he's expressing these things, and I understand both sides. Like, I understand his frustration. Like, get the fuck up. And then I also have sympathy for her, who is just in a whole different realm. She's talking about how she sees aliens. Okay, maybe she did, right? I'm not doubting that, but I'm just saying, like, people in, like, reality in this realm don't want to hear that shit. Like, some people don't want to hear that. Some people are not connected in that sense, and they just don't want to hear that shit. I gotta go to work. What do you mean you saw aliens again? What now? Right? No, nobody wants to hear that shit. So you just have someone who is living in a different realm while you're living here I guess this is 3D, right? We're in 3D, and she's living in 4D. It's just hard. It's hard. So it's just a lot. This show is just fascinating. It's so well done. Niecy Nash is killing her role as the black Karen neighbor. I would describe her as. She's this black Karen neighbor, and this, the setting also. So, okay, again, this is happening in the early 90s. The series starts off in 91 Milwaukee. And Dahmer is living on his own. He's an adult at this point, and he's living on his own, but he's living in, I guess, well, they describe it as like the drug-filled area of Milwaukee. And he's living in this apartment that is not really like, what is this white boy doing here type of thing. But whatever, he is living there. He's the only white person I'm seeing living in that apartment, because everyone else I've seen in that apartment is black. So he goes to, there's a nearby gay bar that he frequents, and he was successful in picking up a black gay guy from the gay bar. He brings him to the house, and he promises him of taking a picture of him or taking photos of him and giving him money. And at first, the black guy was like, oh, well, I don't, like, he was like, well, okay, you can give me $50, right? Whatever. So he decides to go with him. And everything is always in retrospect, right? You always learn from hindsight. You always just pick up like, oh shit, I should have stopped there, or I should have, should have. But you're in the moment. You can't should me down anymore. We're here. We're the fuck here now. So there was several moments in which the black guy, I forgot his name, but the black guy his name was Tracy. Okay, so his name is Tracy. So several moments when Tracy was in Dahmer's apartment, and he was like, oh no. So let's start off by Dahmer opens the front door of his apartment, and Tracy, he's right at the door frame. Something about that particular moment in time, Tracy pauses prior to finally entering his home. He paused. And of course, that was his intuition, maybe telling him, maybe don't go in, right? Don't step a foot further. And you could see it in his eyes. But of course, he decides to take that foot forward. He comes into the home, and then he notices Dahmer. Mind you, okay, so this is what I noticed from the beginning of right before the scene began. Dahmer leaves his apartment, and as he's opening his apartment door, you see several locks. And you also see that despite him unlocking the door, he has to jiggle the door in order to leave successfully. Like, the door's broken. And so he had to jiggle it. So that just speaks to like the door being broken, and only, he knowing, he's the only one knowing of this, and he's able to be successful in opening the door. Okay, going back to Tracy. So Tracy comes in, and he finally enters his apartment. Dahmer closes the door and locks it up. Like, there was this final clink that indicates the last lock. Mind you, it's several locks. And the final lock is locked. And Tracy notices that. And he's kind of like you can see it in his face. Just like uneasy, just very uncomfortable with it. But he's like, okay. So then he notices there's a smell. Like, it smells really bad in here. He's like, man, what's that smell? What's that smell? We then find out it's rotten humans in his home. So, but Dahmer gives the excuse, oh, I just have dead meat, like animal meat. And I like to make pork chops, and this is the result of that. So Tracy is kind of like, you know what? So then he tries to leave. He's like, you know what, man? I'm just gonna, nah, man. I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna head out. Dahmer stops him and then says, no, don't leave. Why does everyone want to leave me? Oh, my heart crinkles. My heart melts. Oh, I'm such a sensitive bitch. I'm too sensitive for my own good sometimes, because I'm just like, how am I being sensitive over this guy who's about to kill this nigga? Ugh. Well, anyway, I mean, of course, later on, we learn as viewers why he said that statement. Why did he make that statement? Why does everyone leave me? And it's just so sad, because, like, now learning about his upbringing, about his mother who just randomly left him and wouldn't have said anything to him had Dahmer not catch her in the act of leaving him. And then when his parents finally got divorced, his father just like fucking disappeared. Like, he left the home, of course. The court favored his wife for having full custody. And so he left the home and was barely in contact with Jeffrey. Jeffrey couldn't get a hold of him. There were rumors that his father was living in a hotel with another woman. And it's like, whatever, he's divorced, move on, that's fine. But like, dang, you can't come by the house anymore. Like, you can't still co-parent in some ways. Like, I don't know. Like, it just, he just literally left. Like, he fucking left him, So, and he was really close with his dad. He couldn't have been close with his mom because his mom was just very distant. in dealing with her postpartum psychosis. But he was really close with his father. And the fact that his father just literally just abandoned him, knowing that his mother, Jeffrey's mother, his ex-wife, is mentally deranged. It's like, dang, like, why couldn't you have done something? You know, especially being that Jeffrey was 17 at the time, he could have easily taken him with him, right? Like, it couldn't have, and his mother didn't care about Jeffrey like that. She felt like Jeffrey was judging her and judging her psychotic breaks, and so she probably would have been fine with her ex-husband taking him. And there was a scene in which Jeffrey Dahmer's dad tells him, your mom and I are divorced, and you know, I love you. I need to get away from this house. He tells his son that I need to get away from this house. And Jeffrey says, "Okay, I'm going with you, right?" Like, he immediately thought, because of their closeness, right? Because of their close bond, he immediately figured that he would be leaving with his dad. And his dad says, we'll figure that out. What? And nothing was ever figured out. Like, Jeffrey was left by himself, literally. So when his mom left, just up and left with his younger son, or with his younger brother, and his dad left the house, you know, due to the divorce, but decided to just not keep in contact with any of his kids, Jeffrey Dahmer is literally in the house at 17, 16, 18 years old, well, 17, 18, by himself. And his mom initially said, oh, she'll be on just a 2-week vacation. In a later scene, we learned that she was absent for months. For months. So just going back, you know, fast forwarding to the present scene from episode 1, when he said that comment to Tracy and saying, why does everyone leave me? Look, I'm not saying we need to have sympathy for serial killers, for serial rapists. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's sad. Like, it's sad. Am I alone here? Like, that hurt me. I felt hurt. I really felt hurt. And sometimes I wish I would have had sensitive dog, because damn. And you could see it in his face. Like, he just never really fit in. You know, obviously him realizing that he's a flaming homosexual didn't help. I mean, yeah, he's gay, right? So, like, you know, the context in that time, he has to feel even more isolated, right? Like, there weren't any like gay support groups back then. There weren't online chat rooms in which he could get his rocks off. He had to kill to get his dick hard. Like, there weren't any comfort groups, right? There weren't anything like that at that time. So feeling already isolated and disenfranchised because he's a product of divorce, he is not fitting in with the social circles. He's already socially awkward. His parents are neglectful, very neglectful, and he's fucking gay. Like, damn. That white privilege is not long in this case, right? Like, in some ways, yes, his white privilege got him away as far as it did from consequences. But other than that, he did not have a silver spoon. Like, and mind you, he lived in a nice home growing up. It's just really, really sad. It is really sad, y'all. I mean, it's sad. I just have sympathy for everything. I have sympathy for everything. I'm not having sympathy for him killing people. Of course not. It's just I have sympathy for the child that he was and him being failed by everybody in his life. That shit is devastating, yo. Like, you know, I just feel like knowing that, you know, for all the years that I've been an educator, I've definitely come across young kids who probably experience something similar to this, right? And from what I've known, definitely have experienced a degree of this as far as neglectful parents, taking on more responsibility, right? Not really being able to be a child, not feeling happy and whole in who they are, not feeling affirmed in their identity. I'm not talking about no transgender shit. I'm just talking about like just feeling comfortable in who they are, right? Maybe not feeling smart because they're the only black kid in the classroom, or not feeling capable because they may have a handicap condition. I'm talking about all those things. And you just have Dahmer here, who was just not really a social fit. He was a complete misfit. He was just very much experiencing isolation on so many levels. No, that was a really sad moment. I'm really sad about it. Anyway, so I think a lot of things come into play when it comes to Dahmer and the way that he was able to gain more victims. So let's talk about how was he able to get Tracy into his home, right? I think, yes, Tracy probably was into him, like maybe like sexually aroused by, oh my gosh, this white boy, let's see how this sex is, right? So I think there's a interest in that, right? Just a sexual curiosity of having sex with a white man. So I think that played a role in it. But I also feel like, being that Dahmer promised to pay Tracy $50, and at that time, that money ran long. And I think because Tracy didn't grow up very well privileged, or, with a lot of access to money at that current time, the idea of receiving $50 just like that was probably enticing. And that's what he did. That's what Dahmer did for all of his victims. He promised them money, and there was another scene in which we see Dahmer get this Asian kid who's 14 years old. We learned that he's 14. And the Asian kid, he tells Dahmer, "You don't remember me, right?" And Dahmer's like, "What are you talking about?" And he references his brother. So the Asian kid has a brother whom Dahmer actually was intimate with. Dahmer actually like tried to get closer to him sexually, and thankfully he got away. And while he got away, he reported it to police, and the police followed up, but nothing really happened after that. I think he just was labeled as a sex offender, but that was just, it wasn't really taken seriously or whatever. Anyway, so at the revelation of this, Dahmer asked him, "So why are you here? If you think I'm a bad guy, why are you here?" And I was thinking the same thing too. Like, wait, you mean to tell me that your brother had this scary experience with Dahmer, and yet you decide to be in his apartment? Like, why did you do that, 14-year-old kid? Like, what's wrong with you? So he said, "Well, you promised me $100, and my family needs the money, so I'm here. That's why I'm here." And it's just like, wow, man, like it really speaks to how poverty was and how it strikes people into making decisions that could cost them their lives. So it really speaks to, like, that's what I'm speaking on. Like, I'm speaking on the fact that you have a lot of impoverished groups of people, whether it's Asians, blacks, whoever. All of them, or most of them, because the first victim, he happened to be white. It didn't seem like he was poor, but I mean, look, he was hitchhiking on the road, so maybe he was a little bit poor. Either way, poverty played a huge theme throughout the victims, So I think if these people had access to resources, quality education, job opportunities, then they wouldn't have found themselves in desperate situations in which you have a 14-year-old who was already familiar of the strange and dangerous behavior of Dahmer. yet he still chooses to be in his home, to be subjected to do whatever Dahmer wanted, simply because of the promise, just the mere promise of $100. Yo, it's sick, yo. It's sick. So we're talking about poverty. We're talking about mental illness. Now let's talk about the Satanic Panic. Ugh. Look, let's talk about that real. I'm gonna look it up. Satanic. Remember, we talked about it a few episodes ago. We talked about it. Let's go back to it. Hold on. I'm typing it up. Apparently there's a show or a movie called The Satanic Panic. Okay. What the fuck? I'm trying to. Apparently there was a 2019 movie called Satanic Panic. Okay, that's not what I'm referencing. Okay. So let's go on Wikipedia. Type in Satanic Panic. Okay? This is what it says. The Satanic Panic is a moral panic consisting of over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse or sadistic ritual abuse, starting in the U.S. in the 1980s, spreading throughout many parts of the world by the late 1990s, and persisting today. So basically, this includes many circumstances during this time frame in which there was this fascination and sensationalization. Oh my gosh, that's sensationalized. That's what I meant to say. There was this sensationalized viewpoint towards Satanism. And there were a lot of young people, young white people, young white teenagers, very much into satanic rituals, buying satanic ritual books, joining satanic ritual worship groups. Like it was a cultural phenomenon. And because of their adoption of this satanic religion, they of course are acting ways to support their beliefs. And many of the beliefs within Satanism is sacrifice and killing. And, you know, if you kill something, you're sacrificing it for something. So anyway, what's his name? Dahmer was into that shit. In the first episode, we noticed as viewers that there was a book on his bedside table, or just a table in his apartment. I think it was the living room. And Tracy notices that too. And you see the close shot of the title of the book, and it was called Satanic Worship or something like that, but it's called Satanic something. And so that was just a glimpse of, oh, he's into that shit, right? So then another scene, he's watching TV, and it's apparently just a horror film that he watches every day. He learns the scenes. He learned the speech that this pastor, this satanic pastor in particular, delivers when performing a ritual. And so he's repeating it, and he's mesmerized by it. He's watching the TV mesmerized by all of this. And it's just like, damn. So anyway, so you see the impact of Satanic Panic upon Jeffrey Dahmer. So you see all these themes, right? You see the theme of mental illness, specifically postpartum psychosis. You see the theme of poverty and, you know, many disenfranchised groups experiencing poverty, which led them to being in desperate times or situations and measures, leading to Dahmer just having success over them. And then you see the example of Satanic Panic over Jeffrey Dahmer's actions, because he was so mesmerized by Satanism. He was so mesmerized by horror that he wanted to mimic that in his actions in real life. And then, of course, you see examples of neglect in his childhood. You see the examples of not fitting in, isolation, homophobia, feeling not like anyone else because you're gay. So all of that really made him successful. That is the making of a serial killer, right? Like you have someone, okay, I'm isolated, I was neglected, I was abandoned. I have a little bit of money that I could use over people who are impoverished and use it to my advantage. So I use poverty as my advantage to get my victims. My mother was mentally ill, so that kind of fucked me up too. And my father abandoned me. Like, it's just. He had no hope. Like, I don't think any amount of therapy, right? Any amount of prayer, and that's no offense to anybody. You know, I get it. Prayer works. I get it. But no amount of any of that could have changed this man. I think some people are just damaged goods. And that's just a horrible perspective to have. I'm sorry. But I do feel like there are some people who are just damaged and just not even good, right? Like he's not even good. But there are some people who are just so damaged and so victimized by their experiences and the circumstances that life have given them that there is no hope. There is no hope. So I think there was a point in time in which Dahmer, his humanity left him. Right? Like, of course, he was still operating in his flesh, right? Like, he's in his body. I'm gonna do body things, right? I need to get up. I need to use the bathroom because I have a body. I need to be a human in this world. I have a body. Like, of course, but I think what really drove him was demonic possession. I think what really motivated him to do everything that he did was demonic possession. I think there was a breaking point in his life in which his body was no longer the good soul that he was created in, because I do believe we're all born in God's image, yet our free will comes into place, and you know, circumstances in life shape us, and we could either decide to be good or be evil. And I think there was a moment in time in which Dahmer decided to just choose evil, and him continuously choosing evil led to his body being possessed by demonic spirits. I'm sorry, you can't tell me different. You cannot tell me different. He was possessed by a demonic spirit, and his body was used as a host for demons. You cannot tell me any different. You can't. And you're being wooey, Maxine. Call me whatever you want, but I'm looking at it from a spiritual lens. I'm looking at it holistically. This is someone who was demonically possessed. Period. And that's why I say there is no, or there wasn't any, because again, he's dead, but there wasn't any way to get through to him. Like, you can't love him out of demonic possession. I'm gonna love you and be a good partner to you. I'm gonna be there. No, he's already possessed. Now, of course, yes, there's exorcisms, right? You know, I do believe exorcism works, and you know, the power of that, but he had no access to that. He wasn't going to church. He wasn't raised in the church. There wasn't a pastor living next to him. Like, he had no access to that. There was no one in his life opening the door for that access. So that's why I say he was damaged. There was no hope for him to ever become holy, to change his ways, to choose good and not evil. Nigga was demonically possessed and damaged, and it's best that is gone. Like, when you have people like that who are just pure evil, it's not because, oh, I just made bad choices. No, you're demonically possessed. And I'm not saying that to say, oh, you know, he shouldn't have gone through the court of law and getting justice. I'm not saying all that, but I'm just saying, like, when you're speaking to someone who's demonically possessed, you're speaking to a whole being. You're not speaking to humans anymore, right? Like, you're wasting your emotion. Like, okay, and I don't mean to shit on the families of the victims who spoke out against him in the court, but I came across this article of this side-by-side image of Rita Isbell, who was the sister of the brother who was one of the victims of Jeffrey Dahmer. And this image shows you a still of the 1992 court proceedings, and she is yelling and screaming at Jeffrey Dahmer. You know, of course, she's impassioned by the crime and the crimes that took place, particularly the one that took place against her brother. But anyway, so she is impassioned, right? She is a human being. She's demonstrating her feelings and just her pain because she is the surviving member of one of his victims. And though that may have been therapeutic for her, right? Maybe her yelling at him and being dramatic in her reaction, rightfully so. I'm not shitting on her for reacting the way that she did. I just think that when you're dealing with someone who is damaged like that, who is so far, he's so far gone. There is no soul in him. You know, there was no soul in him anymore. There was no room for God in him. There was no room for humanity in him anymore. He was completely usurped by demonic spirits. So I say that to say you're wasting your time, right? Like, you're wasting your time screaming at him and asking him what's wrong with you and how could you, you're evil, and even try to like ask him about like, do you feel sympathy? Do you feel sorry? It's like, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time. And it feels like just an uphill battle because you're arguing essentially with a fool, right? Like, you're arguing with someone who's not on your level anymore. You're in reality. He's not present. You're speaking to this vapid energy. Like, you're not speaking to a human being. Anyway, I say all that to say, when someone's damaged goods, you just gotta just not interact because they're liable to do anything and everything because they have no conscience. They have no soul. They're completely taken over by a demonic spirit. There is a debate happening about whether or not shows like this should be shown to the public, should be created in the first place, because it allows victims or the family of victims of these crimes to have to relive through this trauma. And it allows for them to just be dehumanized because people are watching these shows, right? This show in particular, Dahmer, as a means of entertainment, while for the family of these victims are not entertained, right? They're re-traumatized, quote unquote. And so this article focuses on those families and how they feel re-traumatized, and that being that it's like, it's not a documentary, right? These are still obviously real accounts, real events that took place, but they're being acted, they're being reenacted, and it's not necessarily an opportunity for, you know how in a documentary you see from or you hear from the actual family members of the victims, and you give them an opportunity to talk about that, you know, that family member who lost their life, who was killed and who was victimized by Jeffrey Dahmer. But in this show, it's not the case, because you have a situation in which they're not being filmed. They're not being asked about their experience because it's not about that. It's not a documentary. So anyway, this article is talking about that and how it's just a re-traumatizing experience. And, you know, I get that. I really do. You know, I understand the pain with that. You know, thankfully I haven't experienced that necessarily firsthand, but I feel like, you know, there is some validity, of course, to what you're saying. I just feel like, though, and there's also this argument about, you know, well, this type of show, you know, this type of series, these type of movies, this is content in the media that is being shown is giving future murderers ammo, right? It's giving them a blueprint of how to become a a murderer, how to become a serial killer, how to become a serial rapist. It's giving them the tools. Here's the thing, then what the fuck are we gonna watch? Right? Like, not everything is hunky-dory. And there have to be shows and movies present available to us that allow us to understand the psychology of people like this. And it's not to say because, oh, your pain is my entertainment. No, I think it's also about understanding the psychology of someone's behavior and knowing what to look out for, right? Maybe you're in a company of someone who is similar to a Jeffrey Dahmer. And maybe after watching something like this, you can be well informed and you could be well prepared to not find yourself in a situation in which you may be a victim, right? So I think these series and these shows can be empowering. Right, it really depends on how you look at things. Everything is not always this like programming in which to make you this evil person. You could choose to decide how you plan to use this information. And if you use it effectively, great. But if you decide to not use it effectively, then that's also on you. So I don't feel like this should be an opportunity in which, oh, shows like this should be banned and people shouldn't have access to this. You're creating a murderer. It's like, no, like, let me fucking watch my show. Like, I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm not saying that insensitively. I'm really not trying to show insensitivity here. I just feel like there should be some balance. Like, of course, it's sad to know that there are documentaries, or not even a fictional show necessarily, these actions or these actors acting out this moment in time. But this also is an educational moment. Like, this is also a teachable moment for people to gain something from this, and it also tells you about a period in time in life. It could prepare you for any circumstance that may be an experience of yours that may be similar to what you're watching. So I just look at it all as very educational. I think it's an educational piece of content that you can use to inform yourself and others of behaviors to look out for, of situations to avoid, of just things that you got to be more diligent about, because, of course, there are things that you can't control, but there are things that are well within your control that you absolutely can control. And by watching stuff like this, you could realize, okay, here's what I could do to be better diligent or vigilant in my world, in my sphere. But y'all, please check out the show. It's really good. If I didn't say anything else, if I didn't convince you after all of that, then I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say. It's an incredible show. I keep on saying it's not a documentary, but it's obviously real events. But it's not documentary style type of. It's not that. It's a mini series. 10 episodes on Netflix called Dahmer, Dahmer. Dahmer. And, I don't think the show is showing necessarily, it's not romanticized. I think, there was also this criticism about like, oh, it's romanticizing Dahmer. No, it's not. No, the fuck is not. Like, we're just learning about his background, dog. Like, and it also says, so the title of the show is called Dahmer in big letters, but underneath it all, there's a subtitle, and it says monster, and it says a couple other things, but it says monster, right? So it's telling you that, hey, this is a monster here. We're not condoning his actions. We're not saying, hey, it's okay to do this, and as long as you ask for forgiveness. No, like, we're not saying any of that. It's just giving you just insight of how this person in particular became who he became. It's just giving you insight. So I think it's an incredible show. I can't wait to continue watching it and go on another smoke break. And I don't even smoke. All right, you guys, I'm going to end the episode here. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave a positive review on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Anchor. Tell a friend to tell a friend, and I will check in with you guys next time. God bless. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of God Built This Podcast with your host, Maxine. Be sure to leave a review, give me 5 stars, and of course, subscribe. Also, follow God Built This Podcast on Instagram at God Built This Pod. God bless.